Security teams are also bracing for thousands of protesters.
And it just built and built and built. The protesters were coming. Be careful, the protesters was coming in. Stay out of Manhattan.
We have enough officers where if people are breaking the law, we're going to take action.
I am present at the multiple demonstrations of civil disobedience. It's August 31st at the RNC. I'll be turning this camera off now and putting it back on upon my will.
I ask your cooperation so that everybody has a safe march.
Okay, thank you.
We weren't doing anything more than just walking along the street holding signs. The last time I looked, that was illegal to do.
Our march lasted about 5 minutes before it was stopped by the police. Suddenly, all these bicycle police came in and other police.
Arrest teams behind! Arrest teams behind! Close it off all the way down to the front!
People in our group were saying, oh, we're under arrest, and I was like, oh, this is not possible. You know, we've only just started. It's been 5 minutes.
Bicycle officers, hold your positions until relieved by foot cops. Foot cops, 4 minutes back.
And they were called in to surround us with this orange netting, which we had never seen before, like construction site orange plastic netting.
This is the first time anybody had ever seen them do this, and they used it several times during the week. The police just swept the sidewalk.
Everybody stay away.
I'm asking to get out and they won't let me get out.
Why can't I go?
I want to get out. I want to get out.
I'd like to get out.
I want to get out.
Approximately 800 arrests have been made since RNC-related protests began last Thursday.
With the advent of 9/11 and then eventually with the advent of the war and the opposition to the war being very vocal, we had to shift our focus, and certainly on some of those events, they had to ramp up.
And of course, they justified all this in the name of providing security, that things could get out of hand. Well, they weren't out of hand. In fact, people were exercising their First Amendment rights to gather and to make their voices heard, their free speech rights.
The problem is, what do you want the police to do? Wait around until something happens, even if they're on notice, wait till it happens. I don't think that's what most people want.
And they justified the mass arrests on their security information, on their intel data.
NYPD does have the resources, they have the intelligence gathering, they have the leadership, they have the experience, unparalleled in the country for dealing with demonstrations.
It's one thing to engage in intelligence activity when you have suspicion of criminal activity, but when you don't, then it's fundamentally anti-democratic.
And this is legal because of the Patriot Act. The Patriot Act is illegal, unconstitutional, and treasonous.
So right after 9/11, the Patriot Act enacted, and there were restrictions on civil liberties, quite mild by historical standards, but there were some restrictions. And those have now become controversial.
Well, what the Patriot Act does is give the government the authority to get people's private information and to do so shrouded in secrecy so that there's no accountability.
And I want to take this opportunity once again to thank the Congress for providing us with the necessary tools that we need to protect the safety and security of American citizens.
We think about surveillance as a matter of privacy generally, but it's an issue of free speech when the surveillance is of political activity. If the government is watching every move you make, and every move you make includes protesting the war in Iraq, protesting military recruiting in the schools, protesting racial profiling, and the government doesn't like that, and they're keeping a dossier on you, well, you're going to be afraid to protest.
So he thinks he can take away our right of assembly. Well, we can't be blamed for what happens now.
Clearly, when they wrote the Constitution, they didn't think of the new surveillance methods. They didn't think of the fact that on a satellite, you could look into somebody's backyard. They didn't think of all these phone tapping situations. They couldn't imagine any of this stuff.
I've been able to find out that we have had police infiltrators in our group and government infiltrators to find out what we were doing and an attempt to disrupt what was going on.
Became clear after a while, must have been a policy to just sweep people off the streets and keep it nice and clean for the Republicans and for the convention.
It is the soldier, not the agitator, who has given us the freedom to protest. It is the soldier who salutes the flag, serves beneath the flag, whose coffin is draped by the flag, who gives that protester the freedom he abuses to burn that flag.
And I don't think it's just a question of Democrats and Republicans. I think that certainly in times of war, terror, whatever you call it, protests are going to be the first things to go.
What was the Boston Tea Party if not a political protest? And since then, every social change movement has used protest.
What we are learning in the course of these lawsuits is that everybody who was arrested was fingerprinted. All those prints were sent on to the federal government. The problem with the policing guidelines for all this is that the police department sees lawful, legitimate protest as part of a continuum of terrorist activity. Well, don't they get it? In a democracy, you have protest, lawful protest, instead of terrorism. It's the safety valve for a democracy.
When you're in a war that has been declared on you, there can be no peace movement. When forces are committed, you have troops in the field, and you go out in the streets and attempt to block that war effort, it has not to do with speech.
It is hard to see how at any point in American history, whether it's the Civil War, World War I, the Cold War, or the War on Terror, it's hard to see that these infringements on the right to dissent, the infringements on basic civil liberties, actually have any military value whatsoever. Does anybody think that Germany would have won World War I if Eugene Debs had been allowed to speak in the United States? Or is it really the case that we can't allow people basic civil liberties, the right to a trial, the right to see the evidence against them, because otherwise Osama bin Laden is going to take over the world?
So I think if you would add up all the casualties, I think that you're seeing something coming across the nation.
During every war and during every post-war period, there are enormous abridgments of speech. And the government has gotten more sophisticated, and during the Iraq period, you of course have all these technological improvements in how to get at people, privacy, surveillance, etc. And you have a court system that is going to permit it. So this is more dangerous than any of those other times, because at the end of the day, the Supreme Court, the courts, are finally responsible for protecting free speech.
After all these other times, we bounced back, right? So why not expect that we would bounce back this time?
Well, I think it's deeper and more pervasive. Also, you say we bounced back. We had court systems that help us bounce back.
After World War II, you soon went into the Warren Court. After World War I, you soon got into the Roosevelt Court. Now, you're going to have at least 25 or 30 years of the Roberts Court. Now, Roberts is 54. Judges generally sit for 25 years, 30 years. He's been there just a few years. Alito is in his mid-50s. He's going to sit there another 25 or 30 years. You have Thomas, Scalia, and Kennedy. So even with the new Obama appointees, you have a nucleus of a court that is going to be conservative controlled for at least the next 25 years. Nothing like that has ever happened before. So that's what the court's going to be. It's going to be locked.
Was there anything that was very important to you to teach us about free speech and civil liberties?
That if you don't fight for it every day, you're going to lose it. And don't let the fucking guys win.